and share with you just for a little bit on this topic of 5 laws of winning relationships. And in this broadcast, we'll be talking about 5 life-giving practices that can help move your relationships towards health. And so stay tuned for that. I have a guest here with me today, Karen, and that she's been helping me with these projects. This is all part of our Beyond Betrayal project, but also it's just, goes out to a larger audience than that. But Beyond Betrayal is actually a program that I've developed to help people who feel cheated by life, others, or God. And it helps them to kind of walk through that and kind of get on the other side. That's what we're hoping will happen. How are you doing, Karen?
Pretty good. Can't
Good.
believe it's December and we're this far into it.
I know, it's almost over, huh? Yeah. Well, let's just go ahead and we'll jump into the presentation and then we'll have a chance to talk about these things. So this is all part of the 5 laws of winning relationships. And the whole idea behind this is that true love and good friendships don't happen by accident. They are the result of healthy relational habits. And that's what we want to be able to help people to understand as we go through this process. And so there's a passage of scripture, and of course I come from a Christian perspective, as do you, and it's not because it makes me feel good. I'm convinced that it is the absolute truth. And Jesus says this in John 13:35. He says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Now, when it comes to love, love must be shown in all of our relationships, not just the reciprocal and easy relationships, but also the hard and complicated ones. And so, love is going to look different in those hard and complicated relationships. And that's what we want to explore a little bit as we go through our talks on this topic of 5 laws of winning relationships. So here are those laws. Number 1, and we went through this, and we'll continue kind of circle through these things as we talk about these. But number 1 is to adopt the right goal. Number 2, understand the 2 main paths. One is the way of response, and the other is the way of reactivity. Number 3 is recognize 3 key pivot points. Number 4 is to identify and avoid those 4 harmful reactions. And then number 5, and that's what we want to look at today, is practicing these 5 life-giving principles that can help your relationship move towards health. And so I've created a roadmap that, because I'm a visual learner, and it helps me to kind of see these things as they unfold. And this is a roadmap. Everybody starts in the same place. They think that this, is going to be a great relationship, but not everybody ends up in the same place. And some people end up in health and having a healthy relationship, a long-term healthy relationship, and other people end up in heartbreak. And I've even seen people have long-term heartbreaking relationships. Hey, I'm not interested in that. But creating a winning relationship is a choice that anyone can make. Now, Karen, why do you think, let me just get over here for a moment, why do you think that this idea of choice is so important to creating winning relationships?
Yeah, I think that if you say that you don't have a choice, then you're saying that your free will or you have no control in the whole thing. So
Mm.
obviously
Well,
we
let me just interrupt for a moment, and forgive me for doing that. But
no, it's fine.
to a certain extent, we don't have control over it because circumstances and the other person may not cooperate with our goal of having a healthy relationship. So what then?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying you have control over them, but what I'm saying is they don't have control over you.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah,
that you can make the choices of how you're going to respond, whether they respond in a healthy way or an unhealthy way.
yeah. And that's so important in order for us to claim our power in relationships, because so many people live as victims of circumstances or victims of betrayal. But
Mhm.
we have a choice about how we're going to respond, and it's that exercising that choice is where we reclaim our power. And so let's go ahead and we'll go back to our slides for a moment and see what they say here. And so, like I said, winning relationships always start with a choice, and you can make that choice. It doesn't matter what has happened to you. You can make the choice about whether or not you're going to be a healthy person and that you're going to have healthy relationships with other people. So, oops, I jumped too fast there. So, the idea is that winning relationships are a choice, and I can create a winning relationship with anyone, or at least a healthy relationship with anyone maybe, and sometimes that means loving them from a distance, and sometimes that means that a quarantine is necessary. But it's my basic belief that health is always possible. Now, tell me, Karen, what are some of your thoughts about do you agree with that? Disagree with that? Are you unsure?
I think it's possible. In some relationships, I think that health might be the healthiest thing, might be not engaging in the relationship. So, like you said, a quarantine or, a timeout or whatever. And I think with some people, it's not very probable to think that you're going to have a healthy relationship with them,
Mm-hmm.
but that you're going to like, uh, have to have distance or, um, you know, um, it's some people aren't willing to put in the work. So it's up to you how that goes.
Yeah, yeah. Here's what I always say, because I believe that it's possible, and I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback because you said that um, you can't have a healthy relationship with some people, and I may be kind of um, nitpicking here for a moment, but here's here's my motto: is that the best place for a dangerous dog is behind a high fence. And some people are dangerous dogs in your life.
Mhm.
And so the healthiest relationship that you can have with that person is to keep them behind a high fence. And so, you know,
Yeah.
so it's at least my basic understanding is that you can always respond to unhealthy people in healthy ways.
Yeah.
And that means that I have a healthy relationship with that unhealthy person
Mhm.
because I'm responding to them in healthy ways. So, anything you'd like to kind of like push back on or argue with me about that?
I don't like to argue, but
You're a people
you know,
pleaser.
I am. I say my response is my responsibility, and you've used
Hmm.
that against me a couple of times, but
That's a good saying. You know? Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead with our slides a little bit further. And that here's a roadmap is that when it comes to having a healthy relationship with people, is that the one non negotiable goal in our relationships is health. That's what we have to aim for in all of our relationships. And I believe that that's possible in all of our relationships. Their sickness doesn't have to infect us. And so that there are two paths that we've talked about. We talked about this in our previous broadcast, so I'm going through these kind of quickly right now. But there are two paths, and one is the way of response, and the other is the way of reaction. And by the way, where you can see those previous broadcasts are on the channel, most likely on the channel that you're watching, or you can go over to our YouTube page, our YouTube channel at Compass Church Riverside. So the way of response is the only way that's going to take you to health, and then the way of reaction is the way that takes you to heartbreak. And what happens is that when there's a disappointment, right, if you notice on the chart there, right to the right of the loving heart at the start of the chart, is that some disappointment enters into the relationship. And then what that does is that drives people down one of those two paths. And the only way that you're going to have a healthy relationship after you've experienced that disappointment is to choose the way of response. So there are three key pivot points, and we're not going to talk about those in great detail in this broadcast, but I'm just going to mention them. We're going to circle back to those at a later date and talk about those. But following a heartbreak, or at least, when a disappointment comes into our relationship, how you manage that disappointment is critical to whether or not you're going to go down the way of response or the way of reaction. And then if you have taken the way of reaction, then the only way to get back on track is to solve for X. And what that means is that everything changes when I change. When I quit reacting to your craziness and I start responding to it, then everything changes. So, and then once you're on the path of response and things start to get a little wacky, because sometimes they do, then that pivot point is to set redemptive boundaries. And so I have a quick slide here that talks about those, and I'm not going to spend much time on it this time around. But the three key pivot points is how you manage disappointments, whether or not you solve for X, and whether or not you practice redemptive boundaries. So in our previous broadcast, we talked about 4 harmful reactions, and that includes blame, unhealthy communication patterns, the cycle of dysfunction. That's just when, you hurt me and I'll hurt you back type of thing, and it just goes around and round and round like that. And then it's the failure to solve for X. So those are, whenever we are reacting to any hurt that has come up in our relationships, that those things are always present, and it will always take you further into heartbreak. Instead, that there's five life-giving practices, and that's what I wanted to focus on in this broadcast. And so let's talk a little bit about those here. And so following a disappointment in the relationship is that the only way forward is to practice grief and forgiveness. So tell me, Karen, what do you think we mean when we talk about grief, and why is it so essential?
I'll tell you something that I read today, is that grief is an expression of injustice. I thought that was interesting because, we live in a fallen world. And
Yeah.
so the appropriate response to sin is grief. And so I don't know. That was just something. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a couple things that I've heard before. One is that grief is the emotional process of accepting reality. And another one that I've heard before is that grief is the sadness that cures sadness. So let's talk a little bit about how we can unpack that, because, and I think that that really is key. I think that's the key first step when there's been a problem in the relationship. We have a hard time grieving, and in our
Mhm.
Beyond Betrayal program, we walk people through how to do that. But here's what happens when a disappointment enters our relationship is that the relationship that we thought we had with the other person, we discover is not the relationship that we have with them.
Mhm.
Now, that could be a minor offense or it could be a major offense. And typically, what happens following that, and particularly with, well, even in minor offenses, is that oftentimes what we do is that we protest that realization that my relationship with this other person is not the one that that I think that I had with them. And so we get angry. And then that anger throws us down into those, the blame and the negative communication and the cycle of dysfunction and all of that. But when we grieve our losses, we what we're really doing. Grief is the emotional process of accepting reality. So I say, okay, here's the relationship that I have with this person, and so that makes me sad. But I'm not going to let that sadness rob me of my good judgment in figuring out how I'm now going to respond in this situation. So um, I really believe that the key to regaining our equilibrium when we've been knocked off balance in our relationships is to practice grief
Mhm.
and also forgiveness. Let me just talk a little bit about that for a moment as we get back to our our slide. Um, when it comes to forgiveness, I think that people are extremely confused about forgiveness, and that's one of the things that we hope to clear up as we go along in our sessions together. But what do you think, Karen, is the typical understanding that people have about forgiveness?
I think the little cliche of forgive and forget is what a lot of people what comes to mind for a lot of people is
Mm-hmm.
that you have to kind of do a blank slate clean with the person
Yeah.
and wipe away whatever injustice that they did and kind of give them a pass.
You have to have almost like a mental and an emotional lobotomy, you know.
Yeah.
And forgive and forget is probably the stupidest advice that you'll ever receive about forgiveness. And we'll talk more about that at another time. So, um, so if that's what forgiveness isn't,
Hmm.
then what, Karen, do you think forgiveness is?
So, I mean, you have to be able to find a way to move forward. But that doesn't mean that the person doesn't experience consequences for their actions
Mm-hmm.
or or that your relationship is what it used to be, even. So I would say forgiveness is, uh, I guess, probably taking the responsibility of the punishment or the injustice off of you and
Mm-hmm.
not making it your goal or your job to take care of it.
Yeah, yeah. Here's one way that I think about forgiveness is that is that forgiveness really is the only thing that helps me to step beyond resentment and bitterness. And I've been looking at a lot of people, and I'm on Facebook a lot, and that's what where I do a lot of my ministry is on social media. And one of the things that I've discovered as I'm going along is that a lot of people almost wear their status as victim as a badge of honor. And but what I know about victimization or even resentment and bitterness is that nobody wears that well. And the best way to move into a whole new space in your life is to find freedom from resentment and bitterness.
Yeah.
And the way we do that is through forgiveness. Well, I want to just touch on a few other things before we wrap up here today as we go through this list. And let me just come back to my slides for a moment. And that the next step in our life-giving practices is loving communication. We'll talk more about that in another broadcast. Also, power listening. And again, we're going to revisit that topic later, as well as additional building blocks. But how about for you? Now, how long have you and your husband been married now?
It will be 20 years next October.
Cool. So I put you on the spot there. So
No, I know. I knew what it was. We just had our 19th anniversary. That's probably the easier way to say
yeah.
it.
And so Janice and I are coming up on 50 years in May. And so we're excited about that. But so what have you found are some of the additional building blocks that help to build a lasting relationship?
Yeah, so I used to think all the time that like whatever it is that I wanted, that's what the other person would want too. In the whole five love languages, I you give the way that you like to receive love. That's the way you often like naturally give love. But that might not be the way that the other person wants to be loved. And so that was a kind of an eye opener for me in marriage was, and still is. I still am trying to figure out how to give love to my spouse the way he wants to be given love. I may do that our entire lives. I don't know if I'll ever have all the answers, but
Yeah, you never will. You never will. And
uh,
one of the things that you guys do well, and that I appreciate about you, is that you guard your quality time together. And
mhm.
so, and I believe that we need not only quality time together, but we also need quantity time together. Now, and Janice is going to say, well, then why don't you practice that? But hopefully she will never watch this broadcast.
I'll tell her.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. Thanks for throwing me under the bus. So, but
I'm
you,
sure you'll return the favor.
yes, I will. Yes, I will. So, but you and Matt, that you do a good job of that. And we will, like I say, and I know that I say this a lot through the broadcast, but we will come
Mhm.
back to this at a later date. And then finally, the fifth step to this of the life-giving principles that we're talking about is to practice redemptive boundaries. Now, let me just take a moment to
Mhm.
explain a little bit about redemptive boundaries. A lot of people, when it comes to boundaries, they use boundaries as a punitive measure against the other person, and that's really not the the whole purpose of a boundary is that really a boundary is something that you set for yourself. And I like to say, when it comes to relationships, you get what you tolerate. And so if you tolerate verbal abuse, you get verbal abuse. If you tolerate physical abuse, you get physical abuse. If you tolerate alcohol abuse, you get, I think you get the picture. Okay, so you get what you tolerate. So boundaries are essentially saying that the health of my relationship with you and my own personal safety and health are more important to me than to allow you to jeopardize that. And so a redemptive boundary always serves to protect your personal health and well-being, and it also promotes and serves the health of your relationship. And so hopefully that will help when it comes to thinking a little bit about this idea of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because here again, it's one of these topics I hear people talk about all the time, and I really think that they go off track a lot with that. So, is there anything that you'd like to say, Karen, before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thought about the redemptive boundaries is I know, after I had been hurt several times in relationships, I was like, oh, I'm just going to build a wall around myself,
Mm-hmm.
and in doing that, I not only made it so that I wasn't getting hurt, but I also wasn't allowing the good things to come in too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I think with a redemptive boundary, it's working towards what is the best possible relationship that
Mm-hmm.
you can have.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. What's the best possible relationship that I can have with this person? And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully the other person will embrace health and they'll want that. But if the other person is in denial or is, decidedly unhealthy, the best
Mm-hmm.
possible relationship that you can have with them is to keep a dangerous dog behind a high fence. So,
Yeah.
all right. Hey, thanks again, Karen, for
Yeah.
spending some time with me. And don't go away, but I'm going to wrap this up right now. So, good relationships don't happen by accident. And that's what we've been talking about in these broadcasts, and we'll continue to unpack. And so I would encourage you to download my ebook, my free ebook at 5laws.phonesites.com, and you can get the information about these 5 laws. And then also to watch these broadcasts, and we'll do our best to give you a heads up on those. And by being a part of our Beyond Betrayal group on Facebook, and you can find that at beyondbetrayal.org. That's the name of the group, beyondbetrayal.org, is that you'll be able to get notified, or at least you'll receive these broadcasts when they are released. And so thanks for watching today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.